I'm Kate O'Donnell. I am the Executive Vice President of Communications and Brand Experience here, and I'm so grateful for all of you to be joining us today. Today, we are putting a spotlight on women who have made and are making history in celebration of Women's History Month. We have a powerhouse group of women here today, and I want to get right into the discussion and solution sharing. For US News, spotlighting solutions is what we are all about. We do that through our online journalism and events like this, and we do it by spotlighting the institutions and the places that excel in supporting women in a variety of ways. You can see that in our projects such as Best States for Gender Equality, our Best Countries for Women, our Best Hospitals for Maternity Care, and by recognizing best companies to work for supporting family caregiving. We take seriously our role in capturing data and using it to mark both the good and the trouble spots when it comes to things like women's representation, or lack thereof, at the highest levels of leadership in business, education, healthcare, and other sectors. So I don't want to steal the thunder of our conversation this morning on the Young Women's Aspiration Index that was recently released by the National Women's History Museum, but there is one thing here that stood out for me. When it comes to politics, 65% of women and girls say they want to be more involved in politics or social change. Great. Yet only a third of the respondents said they believe women today have as much power as men to create change. As a mother of two daughters, that is absolutely unacceptable to me. So you will hear more about the index and the data from that report later in the hour, and you can read more about some of the key takeaways from that report that we published yesterday on usnews.com. Before we get started, I want us to say a special thank you to Fred Irwin and the National Women's History Museum for their partnership and support of today's program. Like me, I'm sure so many of you in person this morning are still buzzing from the excitement of their amazing Women Making History Awards Gala last night. Now, on with our show. For our opening conversation on leadership in and beyond women's sports, I would like to welcome Alycen McAuley, Chief Business Officer for the WNBA Washington Mystics. Alycen is a veteran leader in the sports industry who has led a digital marketing agency, overseen corporate partnerships for several Fortune 500 organizations, and managed the global marketing of a sporting goods manufacturer, and founded and directed a leading sports marketing agency. She is passionate about championing women's equality and equity, both in and through sports. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Alycen McAuley. And leading today's conversation and the panel that follows is our managing editor for news, Devin Haney. Devin is an award-winning journalist who strives to tell character-driven stories that shed light on social injustice. She especially enjoys reporting and commissioning pieces on women's issues and gender equity. While serving as the international news editor for US News, she prioritized coverage of women's issues across the globe, and her reporting for US News on gender issues has taken her to Canada, South Africa, and Sri Lanka. Devin, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Kate, for that great introduction. So excited to lead this conversation today, and thank you guys again for attending. Great to see this turnout here and online as well. We don't have too much time, just 15 minutes. And Alycen, you have such an impressive and fascinating background. I could ask you a million questions. So in the interest of time, we can just jump in. So we'll go ahead and start with a big picture question, which is how would you describe the current landscape for women and girls sports? How close are we to equal opportunities, and where are we headed?
I would say well, first of all, good morning. I can't wait to hear about Sri Lanka. I find that fascinating. Unfortunately, we're not where we want to be, right? And I don't think anybody in this room would be surprised to hear that. So in general, boys participate at a rate in sports much higher than girls. I pulled some data for you. Interestingly enough, here in DC, we're actually one of the largest disparities between boys and girls. So we have over a 10% percentage point difference between the participation rate for boys and that of girls here in the district. And what you're seeing is that girls just lack the opportunity to actually participate. It's not for lack of want. So there is 1.3 million less opportunities for girls to participate at the high school level than there are for boys. And many of you know Title IX, which has been an essential part of finding equality and equity at the collegiate level. Still some work to be done, but it's actually not applicable to our K through 12 ecosystem. It's actually an area that, from a policy standpoint, we're trying to change, but that's actually really impacting opportunity. And you're seeing that opportunity diminish because of the professionalization of sports. So there's an economic barrier for all kids, but particularly for girls to experience sports. We sadly have a lack of parental support. Sometimes that's willful, and sometimes that's just the situation we're in. We've got multiple jobs, a gig economy. We just don't have the time to be able to do that. We're lacking uniforms, we're lacking equipment, we're lacking field and court access. And unfortunately, we're really lacking good coaches, particularly women who are positive role models for girls to participate. So from an equality standpoint, we still have a ways to go to create the opportunity for girls to participate in the way that they would like to.
Oh, that's interesting. And certainly a bit concerning. So I'm going to ask a question that's going to seem like a real obvious one, but I think it is important to just, put out there. So why is it important for girls to have equal access to sports?
Yep. I regularly talk about the fact that the pathway to leadership for women is actually most direct through sports. So there's a direct and clear correlation between women who reach the C-suite and women who reach leadership and their participation in sports as kids. So the longer you participate in sports, the more likely you are to achieve a leadership level. 94% of C-suite women played sports. 69% of women who make $100,000 or more in any sector played sports. And you will see that there's a direct correlation between the number of years you play sports, especially 8 and more, to a leadership position. And I think what people maybe misunderstand about some of that data is they think, well, those are the people who go on to play collegiate sports. These are the people who are coming into my space in terms of professional athlete. It's actually not about the level of competition. It's about the consistency of play. And so sports is a unique classroom that teaches leadership skills that we really can't find anyplace else and is especially essential for girls. So where else are you going to learn this idea of collaboration and cooperation at the same time that you personally excel? Where else are you going to learn those kind of teamwork lessons, resiliency, the ability to come back from mistakes or setbacks? We're just losing in our culture the opportunity for those lessons, and sports is just such a unique classroom. And girls need those lessons to be able to achieve what they want to see in a leadership position in private industry, government, nonprofit.
Wow. I didn't realize that. Thank you for sharing that with us. So you've got me thinking about my own daughter. She's 7, and I've been putting her in activities for the summer. So now I'm like, all right,
Team sport.
she's getting into those, those soccer classes and those tennis classes for sure.
Well, and team sports in particular, right? Because I think, unfortunately, women are sometimes competitive in the workplace. When you're on a team environment, you actually start to understand that your personal success is tied to the success of the person next to you, that we're not going to achieve the win or the desired outcome if we can't work together. And I need you to be successful. And, we talk about even on the basketball court, everybody has a unique role, right? And we can't all play the same position. We need 5 different players to do that and 5 players who are excelling. And I need to champion you as much as you need to champion me. And we both individually excel with that support.
Right, that makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about your own experience with sports. Did you play sports growing up? What did you play, and sort of how did that affect and sort of influence your path to becoming a leader?
Yep. I definitely played. My mom was of the generation that she wished she could have played. And so when the opportunity became available to young girls, I think she was just such a champion for that. So really early on, I was playing all kinds of sports. I was playing in school. I was playing after school. I was playing in town leagues. There wasn't this professionalization that was happening. My mom really felt like I should try sports that I was good at and sports that I was bad at. She had this concept that like you should see what that's like to sort of really strive in that space. I also tell people I'm a little bit of a cautionary tale in terms of what happens in youth sports, and that I loved basketball as a kid, but I was shorter than all of my friends. You would not know that today, but the growth spurt came late. And when I entered high school, the guy who was running the women's or girls team was like, "You're too short, and I'm sorry, you can't play." I didn't even have a chance to show him I could play. It was just like, "You're too short." And so I switched gears. I actually started fencing in high school. I just thought that sounded really cool. But what a shame, right? Like I actually, I'm 5'8" now. I feel like that, I don't know that I would have made the W, but I had a passion for it. And one person takes that away. And that was, I was talking about like bad coaches and lack of role models and like people who have a larger landscape for the space to say, there was surely a place that I could have kept playing.
Yeah. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but just kind of going back to what's keeping more women and girls from participating in sports, both as players and in leadership, and how do we go about truly leveling the playing field?
Yep. It starts with access, right? So that the number of opportunities. It is that coaching, right? Like we need more women who are willing to be coaches. I think this is true in all kinds of aspects of our society, but women don't want to take on that role because they think they're not good enough to do it. The guys do not have that same prohibition. So you yourselves have an experience where someone is coaching your kids in sports, and you may have that conversation and be like, "Oh, did you play this sport?" "Oh no, I've never done it before in my life." You're like, "But you're the coach?" So there's two problems with that. One, that he thought he could do it, and like, so now your son or daughter is getting coached by someone who doesn't have that experience. But the flip side is like, well, why can't we volunteer? And one of the things that we're working on is really to champion more women to take on those coaching roles, give them the training so that they can do that. So coaching, access, equipment, mentorship from other women. And I think the other piece is like, girls drop out of sports at twice the rate of boys when they reach adolescence, 14 years old. That coincides with changes in our bodies. So periods and puberty. And men, coaches, are not aware of some of the things that we need as women to be able to continue to play. So very simple kinds of things like maybe girls don't want to wear white shorts to play sports. And we really need coaches who have some sensitivity to those kinds of things, right? Or one of the initiatives we take on is to collect and distribute sports bras to young girls to help them continue to play and understand why that equipment is very important to your play.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit? So your team is owned by Monumental Sports and Entertainment. They own several teams, but they do more than that. They're also, you've mentioned to me before that they're also involved in the community. Can you talk a little bit more about the District of Play initiative and how it's empowering young girls?
Yeah. Yesterday, if you saw the news, we distributed over 30,000 basketballs here in the district, one for every kid in DC. We drove a big bus to start that yesterday. Thank you. That's part of the District of Play. So the District of Play is trying to create those opportunities, right? So it's everything from equipment like the basketballs to refurbishing courts and rinks so that kids can play. It's about funding organizations that are finding those coaches and training those coaches. We're working on a girls empowerment program to be able to connect the lessons of sport to where their life path is taking them. So there's a bunch of initiatives specifically within District of Play that's really meant to just create more opportunities for kids to play. Within the Mystics itself, we really obviously work on girls basketball, so camps and clinics, sampling opportunities for girls, funding opportunities for girls to get connected to the women of our organization, whether they're players or front office. And, just really being out in the community, visible as role models for girls and boys for what female leadership looks like.
Right. Wanted to ask you about sort of your own professional path. Can you talk a little bit about, how you became Chief Business Officer for the Washington Mystics? Did you have any key mentors who helped you along the way? And just sort of, could you share any thoughts you have about, excuse me, what's still holding women back from reaching these top leadership positions, and how we change that moving forward?
I'll start by saying I've absolutely had mentors. They've been critical to my success, men and women who have been champions for me and for the vision that I set for myself in terms of what I wanted to do. I'm a very intellectually curious person, and I really wanted to see all aspects of the sport industry. So you heard when Kate was introducing me, I've kind of had a stint in all the different avenues within sport. I really wanted to see it from all angles, and that's really driven my career journey. And in order to do that, I've had to have mentors and champions who have helped do that. And I think that's actually one of the things that's holding women back, right? Is that we don't have enough of those champions, particularly because we hit these like broken rungs in the career ladders where we just can't get to the next step. Either it's a lack of opportunity or it's a lack of insight from the top to see us as possible in that next step. And that's where those mentors and champions are really quite key. I think the existing stereotypes, are still unfortunately pervasive. I think especially in male-dominated industries, I think that's hard. The balance of work and life and kids is an undue burden, truthfully, on women in the workplace versus some of our male colleagues. I can speak from experience. I have 2 young children. I have a job that's not 9 to 5. And that balance is tough. And I think that's a systemic issue that we really need to try and address in the workplace to create more opportunities for women.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we're about at time. Just, I wanted to thank you again for your insights in this conversation. You've certainly given me a lot to think on and sort of marinate over, as a mom of a young girl in particular. So
young boys too, right? So the last thing I'll leave you with is I have 2 young sons. I think it's really important that they come out to our games and that they see in person what female leadership looks like. So they're in the stands and they're watching what different leadership looks like on the court. And we have very different leaders on the court, but they're also seeing their mom. And truthfully, a majority of women have the roles in our organizations. They're seeing women take on all different roles. They see women as sellers. They see women as like venue operators. They see women, running marketing. And, unfortunately, I think maybe they only see women in certain, roles. My kids are seeing women in all different roles. And my favorite story is my oldest son one day said, well, like, how come the star of the Mystics doesn't play for the Wizards? She's so much better. And I thought, that's perfect. He doesn't see gender. He doesn't see gender in that. He just sees excellence, right? That's what we need, right?
That's great. Well, that's such a great note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Been great.
Great.
Thank you, Alycen. And I think you're right. I think there are a couple of women in the W who could possibly do well. But we won't say that about the fellas, right? But thank you again, Alycen. Thank you, Devin, for leading that conversation. In case you do not know, I'm Marion Phillips III, the Senior Vice President for Community Development and DEI here at US News, and we're honored to have you in our space this morning. I'm not going to linger. I'm going to get straight to what I'm supposed to do. We have 2 trailblazing women here who I am very, 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 very partial, biased, and I think they're amazing. I met both of them 2 years apart in similar settings, and we hit it off so well. So let me tell you how I met Fred first. Fred and I were at a luncheon, And I'm not going to say we were dead bored, but boy, were we close. And we gave the obligatory greeting to each other. Hey, how you doing? Hi. And then eventually, about midway through, one of us says, "Are you bored?" "Yes." And they had to tell us to be quiet for the next 30 minutes. But I think it just goes to show you when there's a connection, there's a connection. And so, Fred, congratulations on last night. And I'm grateful we're able to do this together and continue moving issues forward that are so important to our country and to this world. I met DeNora at another conference. And she walked up to me, "Hi, I'm DeNora." "Hi, I'm Marion." And it was kind of, blah, blah. The next thing I know, we're on Zoom every quarter. She's picking my brain. The next thing I know, she sends me an email and says, "Hey, big brother, I need some information." And again, glad that we hit it straight off. She runs an organization called DoSomething.org, which is about young men and women getting engaged. So today we're going to have a conversation on this report. A report that shows that there's a huge disparity. And then you look at DeNora, she has all these young people around the country who can start helping us take this data to the streets. So I'm going to call both of them up now, and I'm going to give you a little bit about them. Frédérique Irwin, the president of the National Women's History Museum. New York is the center of my universe, and DeNora Getachew. Fred has 25 years experience in strategic management, entrepreneurship, and nonprofit commercial business. Prior to joining the National Women's History Museum, she served as managing director of impact strategy at Sorensen Impact Center, where she managed high-level partnerships around social impact sector and initiatives around improving equity in higher education and women in entrepreneurship. In 2012, she founded and led Her Corner, a company educating women on how to scale businesses. She has taught business management, entrepreneurship, and organizational behavior at the Kugad School of Business at American University. So honored to have you with us, Fred. Second, we have DeNora, who's the CEO of DoSomething.org, a 31-year-old national hub for youth-centered impact and service. Do Something fuels young people ages 13 to 25 to change the world by taking action on the issues most pressing to them and their communities. DeNora is a democracy lawyer who has served as the New York Executive Director of Generation Citizen and a leader of campaigns at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law and Citizens Union. She was also a policy director for public advocate Bill de Blasio before he became mayor of New York City. Along with the many other boards and purpose-driven organizations, DeNora serves as the chair of the board of Higher Heights for America, a nonprofit that harnesses Black women's political power and leadership potential. Welcome to you both to our headquarters.
Thank you, Marion.
Hey guys, yes, of
Good
course.
morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. So, Marion and Kate have both mentioned this index, and I certainly want to dive into that. There's so much there to unpack. I think they may have mentioned this, but if you guys want to read the report, which you should, you can find it on the National Women's History Museum website. And we also have put out a story on it at usnews.com, so you can go there to find it as well. But before we, move on to the report and really unpack it, I wanted to just take a second and give you guys an opportunity to introduce your organizations in case people aren't familiar with them. So Fred, if you want to start and just give sort of a brief synopsis.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. The National Women's History Museum has been around for nearly 30 years. And when it initially started, it started because, as you may have heard me say last night, we know that only 15% of what is taught in the U.S. standards of social studies across this country is about women's accomplishments. And so in 1996, a group of incredible women started this organization not only to advocate for a future building here in Washington, but really more importantly, to begin capturing and telling those stories. And so what is very fortuitous for us today is that in this world of artificial intelligence, we have spent nearly 30 years already documenting all of these stories, these biographies, these histories online. And so that's really, we are digital first and plan to continue doing that.
Great.
Good morning, everyone. I'm DeNora Getachew, and thank you to Marian and the entire U.S. News and World Report team, and to you as well, Fred, for joining this conversation today. Do Something is the hub for youth-centered activism and service. We really exist to fuel young people, 13 to 25-year-olds, to find out their own civic why, and then turn that into action. Connecting back to what Alycen said before, our founder, one of our co-founders was Andrew Shue, if anybody remembers Andrew Shue of Melrose Place.
Yeah.
And at the time, I know, right? Ooh. He called me the other day. I was like, oh, Andrew Shue's on the phone. Hold on. Everybody pause. He founded it with a very novel goal in mind, how to make volunteerism as cool as sports, right? We all know that if we play sports, we can get engaged and be in our community, but people, young people especially, don't often see themselves as part of a larger community. And so back then, it was just about breaking down the barriers to civic participation. 30 years later, so we're of the same age, we really exist to help young people go from that curiosity, like, what do I care about, to what can I actually do about it? And to get that civic muscle in order, right? In any area that they care about, we want to give young people the tools, the resources, and the skills they need to be leaders in ways big and small. If they can envision that, that will lead to a society where all people are participating, all people feel engaged and equipped to lead. And so we do that work also largely through our tech-powered platform, which we've been doing for the last 20 plus years. But we also increasingly are bringing young people back together in real life, because we know that that connectivity, that connection is missing for young people, especially if we think about digital native young people who came of age during COVID. I have 3 children, so I have a 28-year-old son who I had when I was a senior in high school. And so for me, the importance of this work is personal. But then I also have 2 daughters who are 13 and 14. And we used to say iPads were for airplanes. Like literally it would come, we'd put it in the drawer, and you couldn't use it until the next time we got on an airplane. And now our children live digital lives. They think of each other when they're playing or when they're, forming ideas or doing their homework. It's all happening digitally. And so we do have to bring them back together to get some of that connection. So really excited to have this conversation today, especially to talk about the work that young women need to do to be able to achieve that gender parity, because over 60% of our members, we've got 1 million young people all over the world, in every area code here in the United States, 1 million of those young people, 60% of them are women, and they want to literally do something. And so my job every day is to figure out how to equip them to lead.
Awesome.
Great.
Now you can see why we partnered.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, let's talk a little bit about the report that you guys have partnered on, the Young Women's Aspiration Index. Fred, can you talk a bit about sort of the main objective with this report and how it fits into your larger campaign to address gender disparities?
Mm-hmm. When I came on board to the museum almost 2 years ago, somebody shared that 15% statistic with me. And one of the things I like to ask, aside from, of course, what's the impact of the work that we do, I like to understand what's the consequence of not addressing this problem. And so one of the things that I realized when I continued pulling the thread and saying, well, what is the consequence of not teaching women's stories and women's history from K through 12? The way that consequence shows up over time is in the gender parity gap. And so I went to those who measure the gender parity gap, the World Economic Forum. They've been measuring it globally for quite some time. And I read their report on the United States, and they said, we're 100, first we were 95 years off in 23, now we're 106 years off. So I called them. I called the woman who does all the reporting in Switzerland for the United States, and I said, I just want to make sure that I understand how you got to the 106 years. I said, you're looking at representation of women across 4 main sectors, right? You're looking at education, access to healthcare, access to economic parity, and access to political representation. And if we were to see an increase in representation in women in any of those 4 sectors, then the gap would close. And she said, yes. I said, got it. Okay. So at that point, I began to say, all right, if I do my job, and I make sure that teachers and folks outside have access to women's history and women's stories, then I can inspire those young girls to continue to stay in the game, stay in industries, and we are doing our part to contributing to closing the gender equity gap. But then it dawned on me, does anybody even know that we have a problem? And I wasn't sure. And so we ran a Harris poll with you guys and just asked one question. We said, how far away are we from gender equality in this country? And 54% said we already had it. And nearly 70% of Gen Z men said, oh yeah, we definitely have it. And almost 50% of women did, Gen Z women. So at that point, I realized that the urgency of underrepresentation, and it is urgent because when we don't have women represented across those 4 sectors, not only does that gap get more and more wide, but we are actively leaving half our population sidelined from addressing some of our most important issues and problems. And so that led me to say, all right, if I'm going to launch a campaign to highlight the urgency of underrepresentation, the first thing we have to do is actually dig into the problem. But the one thing I didn't want to do, because I feel like this is done all the time, is do another report that's like, womp, 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 it sucks. You know what I mean? I just wanted to make sure that we understood the problem, but then we actually began to understand the solutions. And guess what? I really didn't want to go to a bunch of like middle management, senior management people saying, "Now, what are you doing at your firm?" What I really wanted to do was actually go to the folks that are in Do Something's, or orbit, or whatever it's called,
Membership.
membership.
Yeah.
I'm a little tired, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
And ask them.
Yeah.
And so this report, I'm sorry, this is such a long-winded answer, but this report started by saying we are at 106 years. We worked with Mount St. Mary's University, which is a research institute out of Los Angeles, and we said, give us the current state today, so the as-is state for all 4 sections. And then we worked with Do Something, and we asked young women between the ages of 13 and 27, what do you think needs to happen in each of these 4 sectors to change this situation? And that's the heart of the report, is that it provides their perspective on how we do better in representation.
Great. Thank you for that context. That's really helpful. To pivot to findings,
Yeah.
what were some of the things that most stood out to you after this was completed?
No, it's your report.
To either of you.
No, you saw it as a reader.
DeNora,
What do
there
you think?
you
No, I mean, I think, the report itself, for me, what was inspiring, because I always like to, I'm a realist with a dose of optimism, is that young women want to achieve, right? They want to be leaders. And what we found to be true is that they don't always know how, right? And so we have to do our part. I think we're not going to get to the solutions yet, but I found it very compelling that despite those stats you outlined of like how many actually believe we've achieved gender parity already, and maybe that had something to do with the climate during which we were last year, where we could manifest or we could see that there was someone who could end up being the president of the United States who was a woman, saying that in a nonpartisan voice. Maybe that helped them perceive that we had achieved gender equity. The flip side of that is, it is very sad to see how little representation there is in Congress, right? 29% of the elected officials in Congress are women, but there are 51% of us on Earth. Like, what is that? What? Like, you're gonna go walk into the halls of Congress and you're gonna solve problems on behalf of women, but there are not enough women at the table. So that to me was a stark finding. I think also one of the things that jumped out to me was that there was a lot in the healthcare inequity space around the stress that comes from having the lack of healthcare resources and how that puts them further back. If you think about every day you start your day and you're already feeling like you're starting behind, how do you achieve in the world? How do you even perceive that you can achieve in the world? But I don't want to be a doomsdayer, so I'll let you point some other findings
One
out.
of the things on the healthcare space that I found particularly interesting is that I think we had over 1,100 respondents to the survey. Out of that, only 5 were parents, identified as parents. And yet, the number 2 solution requested under healthcare was better support for working parents. So what that tells me is that even though they're not even in that moment of their life yet, they're acutely aware that that's a barrier that has not been solved, that is going to continue to hold them back.
That's right.
One of the things I will say that people often say to me and a lot of us is, oh, but so many women are going to college. More women are graduating college than men. More women are going into medical school or whatever it is. And yeah, that's true. But women bear 2/3 of the debt for college loans in this country. And they also do not receive equal pay for equal degrees. And in fact, the further you go in your education, the wider the pay gap. And so when we surveyed your membership and we said, what do you think? What's interesting about the findings is that they are very much aware that men are given more conversations, whether that's through mentorship or other, about changing fields, about technology roles. And we are still living in a world where there are certain careers that are, quote, better for women. And those tend to be lower paying jobs.
That's right.
So there's just, there is forward momentum. And I do want to say, to your point about being an optimist, we saw that 89% of respondents said that they believe men have more advantages than they do. And yet they all are so motivated and so driven and so like they really want to build a phenomenal future for themselves.
That's right.
Right. Great. Thank you, guys. So sort of, pivoting the conversations to solutions, and and how we go about sort of closing these gender gaps. Wanted to continue touching on the point about higher education that you brought up, Fred. So I think, the report mentioned how women earn a majority of bachelor's and master's degrees, yet, they go on to be underrepresented in leadership roles, once they're out in the workforce. So I'm curious, do you guys have any thoughts on, what's happening in higher education that is holding them back? And what needs to change to give them more leadership opportunities in the future?
What do you hear?
Can I take us back further? Because I think it
course.
starts way sooner, right?
Sure.
If you've gotten to higher education and you don't have a sense of empowerment, it is going to be so much harder of a hill to climb. What we see from our members, in particular in the area of STEM, right? We've been doing a lot of work over the last decade to help young people from historically underrepresented communities in STEM see themselves in STEM. Because if by 7th grade you don't have access to STEM education, you will not see yourself in a career in STEM. Like, think about that, right? I have a 13-year-old. Maybe she's watching. I hope she's watching right now. I sent the link this morning. I said, please watch. Mom, no. If you at that age have not been exposed to think of yourself as competent in math or competent in science, the hill to get over that, by the time you get to higher education, you're never going to pursue a field that way, right? I also think about, and this was so powerful about last night's event, my heart is still fluttering from it, so thanks for having me there. This notion of uncensored, right? Like, we run a campaign called Uncensored, where we're helping young people read banned books and talk about why they shouldn't be banned. We've had 25,000 young people read books that are banned. For Women's History Month, we're focused on women authors. Because if you can't see it, you can't believe it. We don't know that all the amazing leaders who were on the screen last night, right? We could list them all, even some I didn't know. I was like, let me Google who that is. If they can't fathom that men got credit for things that women invented, how could they ever see themselves as an inventor, right? So I think it goes way earlier, Devin, to your question, than higher education. Yes, there are things that can happen at the higher education level, but then I would say also, right, we know many young people want to make a difference, women in particular. Our membership, the women say overwhelmingly they want to see change in the world. Guess what? They don't know how. They aren't actually being given civics education in schools to learn, right? Like, it's a little early in the morning for me to be singing, but if I were, I'd be like, I'm just a bill. The kids are not getting I'm just a
On
bill.
Capitol Hill?
On Capitol Hill, they're not
love
getting
that
it,
one.
right? They're not getting it. My niece is cringing now. Everybody's uncomfortable. And if they actually don't have that basic formative civic knowledge, civic skills, how do we expect them to have civic agency? So by the time they get to higher ed, they can't advocate for themselves, let alone for changes they want to see in the world.
Right. So they're in higher ed, they're getting degrees, in greater numbers than men are. So what's preventing them then from going on, joining the workforce, and becoming leaders at the same rate that men are? Is it a confidence issue? They have the degree, but they don't have the confidence, or what are some of the roadblocks
Yeah,
they're
jump in
facing?
here, please.
There are more roadblocks and issues that we could name here
Yeah,
all the way
sure.
to next week.
Right.
And actually, what I believe is that there are so many organizations in this country that are working on these issues, whether it's from a sports perspective, a leadership perspective, and thank goodness that they are. But what we don't have is a cohesive approach to this problem. And so actually, that's part of why we launched this campaign, because we were like, hey, if any of you all here or anywhere is in support of women and girls, join this campaign. She's not a footnote. And let's organize. And let's make sure that when it's a leadership thing, we say, hey, you guys over here, you guys over here, you guys over there. The truth is that representation is what two of my friends here and I have been calling the big, what do we call it? The big leak. The big leak to our sinking ship, as one of our dear friends refers to it. Representation is the solution, but it has so many different problems along the way. And what I'm trying to say is if we just begin to see an increase in representation, if you see it on the policy side, then all of a sudden you'll see more women in politics who are representing families and women. And then all of a sudden you'll see better family laws. If you see more women in leadership in companies, they're going to demand equal pay, and that will change. If you see more women in education, et cetera, et cetera. But so I'm looking at it really kind of from a broad perspective. There are within each of these, there are hundreds of organizations doing phenomenally important work to help solve this. And I would like to see all of these organizations united. The last thing I'll say, though, is that consistently across this survey, all 4 sectors, what came up every single time as what do you need in order to begin to see forward movement in this sector was more representation. Consistently, they were all saying, you know, whether it's in the classroom in higher ed, whether it's in sports, whether it's in education, whether it's in the textbooks, which is where we play, we need to have more live examples. And guess what? You're not the only one who saw these 4 phenomenal women last night and said, oh, I never heard of her. You know, why? Because none of us were ever taught about a lot of these women. And so we're not pulling the thread and following the paths. So.
Thank you. You know, one thing that struck me in the report is that a lot of the young women that you surveyed, you know, had concerns about their access to quality healthcare, you know, and gender disparities there. I think all of the women in this room, we all have a sense of why that's important. But I'm curious if you were going to, pitch this to say, my 65-year-old uncle in Indiana, like, you know, why this matters, like why he in sort of society in general should care that women have access to quality healthcare and equal access. Like, what would you say? What's the larger case that we make for why that's important?
You go first, because I got a lot of opinions.
Oh, I don't think I have a lot of opinions. I mean, I can't wait to meet your uncle in Indiana, but the reality is women are the backbone of our society, right? You look across history, we would not be anywhere we are without a woman, right? And so that's why we have to rename it Her Story instead of History. It is because of the work of women, whether it's quietly or silently or boldly in the front, that we are in this moment. And if we don't take care of the healthcare, whether that's mental health or physical well-being, right? Because I want to say, young people, do something members care passionately. Number one issue, I've been CEO there for 4 years, that our members care about is safety and well-being. They want to be safe in their homes, in their schools, in their communities from the pervasive threat of gun violence, and be able to take care of their mental well-being and their physical well-being. And that mental well-being, we're just now, I think, cracking the tip of that issue and how it affects young girls in particular, right? We've seen all of the Surgeon General reports around the impact of social media and technology at scale on women, and it's having an impact on their ability not only to take care of themselves, but to take care of others, right? And so I think your uncle would relate to that, right? He's had a woman in his life at some point who helped do something for him to make it possible for him to do whatever he needed to do in his life. Right. Someone had a quote last night, I said, I promised I was gonna say it, right? Our girls have to climb, our boys will be fine, right? The boys are always going to be fine, but the girls are gonna have to keep climbing. Well, they can't climb if their health and well-being isn't well.
Right.
That's what I would tell your uncle. Hopefully that
Right.
resonates.
Yeah, and he's got daughters.
Even better if he has daughters.
But
But so many other reasons.
That was Rosie Rios, by the way.
Yes.
She's awesome.
Is she awesome?
Yeah.
I was like, again, take me back to last night.
I think the first question I would ask your uncle in Indiana is, what do you care about? Like, what issue matters to him?
Yeah.
And maybe he would say, what do you think he'd say, actually? He's your uncle.
What matters to him? I mean, he loves his kids. He's got 2 daughters and a son, and I think he wants them to have, you know, all the opportunities, you know, and a chance at success moving forward.
So
Family guy.
Yeah. Okay. So he cares about education and access. And I always say, like, it can be anything. It can be climate change. It can be the economy.
The economy.
Okay. So the economy, he cares about the economy. The first thing I would say is, okay, you know, if we don't provide proper healthcare, and by the way, healthcare that does not penalize women, because right now, out-of-pocket cost for insurance for women is much higher than for men,
Mhm.
right? So we get penalized across the board, whether you have access, if you have access, where that access is across the board. What happens when that access is not strong? If you can't take care of yourself, right? How are we going to actually have women in the room to solve some of these issues that he cares about? It's really, frankly, I'm trying to flip it on to make it selfish, make it about what you care about, and understand that if we solve these issues consistently, what you care about gets better too.
Mhm.
Right. I don't know, do you guys just have any more general thoughts and sort of, barriers in terms of access to quality healthcare? Like what's getting in the way? What are the problems that we should be really focused on solving right now?
I'm not going to touch this one. I'm married to a doctor. He's got I hear about this stuff all the time.
I bet.
What are you hearing?
Well, I touched on one already, and that's a really big one, which is access to mental health support.
Yes.
Gen Z, digital natives, again, they came of age during the pandemic, during economic uncertainty, during turbulent times. Optimistically, though, I think they genuinely believe that transformation is on the precipice, but we all have to do the work together to get there. It's a conversation for another day. So mental health supports are huge for young people, right? We've done a lot of work at Do Something to help young people get access to mental health support in schools. Did you know that most schools in under-resourced communities have one guidance counselor for like 20 students? That's inequitable, right? So how do we actually talk out loud about the support young people need and give it to them? But then also help them be upstanders for themselves. So we've done a lot of work to train young people to spot when they themselves or their peers are facing mental health incidents and be reporters about that, right? So we've trained over 7,000 young people nationwide to be just first responders as we navigate this time. So mental health support is big. Physical well-being and physical support is key as well. So many young women are concerned about access to menstrual products. Just like the fear that I don't have menstrual products at home, so I can't go to school today, or I can't go to sports in those white shorts. Why would I go to sports in those white shorts if I don't have the menstrual products I need at home? And just that inequity in of itself is a barrier to them being able to achieve anything or see themselves sitting in the classroom properly focused, et cetera. So I would say those are two that come to mind for me and when I think about the lens of young girls. And really then on the STEM and STEAM front, like how do we actually help them see themselves as fixing some of these problems? Because they are solutions oriented, but they're not being given the tools, the education, the resources to be able to sit at the table and know that they'll be appropriately compensated for the same work that their male counterpart is doing.
Yeah, the mental health piece came up really quite a lot in this survey as one of the biggest areas of concern, barriers to access, barriers to appointments, barriers to conversations about it. Really, I mean, the anxiety levels that we're seeing, even through this survey at such young ages. I mean, we were talking to some of your members who were 13. And so it's really important.
So pivoting from healthcare to sort of the workplace, what are some of the most effective strategies we can adopt to ensure equal participation for women in the workforce? And how can we make workplaces more welcoming and conducive to female leadership? I bet you guys have a lot of thoughts on that one too.
The most obvious one is equal pay. I mean, come on, like what? Right. Let's pass some laws that say you have to pay women the same as men for the same education, the same experience. And I'm so sick and tired of hearing about the nonsense of like, oh, she went and had a family and I'm like, baloney, because you give me one working mom and I'll put her up against two non-working parents any day of the week.
There you go.
Anyways, sorry. So I do, and that came up again and again and again when we asked these young women, like within the economic sector, they really, I mean, over 80% of them said that men have more opportunities for leadership and work than they do. And yet, when we asked them, well, what do you want? They literally said equal pay, a great career, and policies for my family. So they're aware of the barriers, and yet they all want to get paid for the same hard work, and they're willing to work hard. So again, I don't understand, like we've got this incredible 51% demographic that is ambitious, motivated, driven, wanting to work, and we are paying them less and sidelining them. It doesn't even make any sense. Sorry.
No, don't, why are we saying sorry? Wait, I thought we were getting our money. No,
So when we say sorry.
no sorries. No,
Forget
no
it.
self-deprecating.
Roll that back.
No, she didn't mean it. She's not sorry.
I'm
Equal
not
pay.
sorry.
I would also say, right, we need strong allies in the workforce, right? So back to the representation point. If you can't see someone else in senior leadership in those roles, and those people are not sponsoring you or mentoring you or helping open the door, how would you believe that you can achieve at that level? Right? So like, yes, we need unequivocally, we need the equal pay, then some. I mean, I feel like we could just like start a movement around like equal pay and then some, right? We'll come up with a good name for that. So we want the back pay for the equal pay. And we want to make sure we're getting our whole dollar plus. But we also want to know that when we're in the workforce, that there are people who are, you know, across spectrums are being the ally for us to help move more women to the front of the line. And I think we're in a moment where it feels like the exact opposite. Like we are literally having a backsliding and it's everything's anti-women, anti-people of color. And you're like, wait, but I thought we were getting closer to the table where we were going to get some of that equity. And it feels like the exact opposite. And young women are seeing that, right? I think they are watching in this moment and wondering, what are we all going to do to help fix that or help address that root cause problem so that we're not even further behind? Because you went from 96 to 100, 93 to 106 years. So even when I was saying to my daughters, like, I've got to go to DC, I've got to do this thing, and I'm talking about gender parity, and they're like, 106 years? Like, that won't happen in my lifetime, right? Like, no offense to all of us, we're going to live good, strong, healthy lives. We're going to get equal pay at some point, but we're not going to get that in our lifetime. Can you like fathom that you're going to be working hard for something that you're not going to be the beneficiary of to achieve, but yet you're going to keep working at it, right? We're all going to keep working at it. That's hard to hear. As 13 and 14-year-olds, hard to say. Like, that may not happen in your lifetime unless we like radically transform our society, which we can do. We just lean into
Can I
it.
tell you a quick story, actually?
Yeah.
Because people always say, like, well, what can we do? What can we do? And, you know, step one is increase representation in politics. Step two, we pass the laws. That's going to take a while. But I want to tell you guys a story of a guy that I worked with years ago. And this is the most wonderful story that ever happened to me. He and I were in management consulting together, and we were just one rung. He was a principal 2 and I was principal 1, and we were, you know, from 1 to 2 to 3 to partner. And every review, he would sit down with me and he'd say, okay, Fred, tell me your numbers. And I'd be like, what? He goes, what's your bonus? Where are they putting you? Because I was just one level behind him. And so I'd tell him, and I'm like, why do you want to know? And he goes, because I want to make sure it's fair. Because I have 2 daughters and you work just as hard as I do, and I want to keep this firm accountable. And I will never forget that story. And I tell that story because for anybody in this room who has boys, who is a man, who has brothers, tell them to do that for the women that they're with right now, so that we can make things better right now. There are things we can do right now.
Right.
I love that story.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
That is. Okay, so you were just saying sort of in
we get off
terms
track?
of
Sorry.
no, in terms of how we get where we want to be. Step 1, more political representation.
Yes.
This is going to seem obvious, but why? Why is that important? And then sort of secondly, you know, what are the obstacles to getting to gender parity right now in terms of political participation?
Well, what's interesting, again, if you look at the data in this survey, is that very few women that we surveyed see representation in politics and see a path forward for them. But a huge percentage of them, I think it was 67%, don't quote me, I have to look up the report, say that they think that they have the qualifications, the leadership capabilities to go into politics.
That's right.
And so you've got a demographic who doesn't see kind of, you know, what that path looks like for her, but wants to be involved. And to your question about, you know, why does it matter? Frankly, it matters just to get diverse perspectives, to have diverse representation, diverse points of view, making these decisions at the state, local, government level. So.
That's the answer.
That's the answer. That's it. Okay, great. So I wanted to pivot a little bit, talk about your own sort of individual career paths, how you got to where you are, and sort of what you're seeing in your work today. DeNora, this one's for you. Having worked with young leaders for years, what trends are you seeing among female leaders today? And are there any concerns or encouraging developments that you'd like to share with us?
you know, so I'm not a little bit optimist. I'm gonna start with the real first.
Okay.
We have 1 million active members. They're 13 to 25. There's gonna be a quiz later about do something. I'm just kidding. We know that they care about 3 key pillars of issues. First and foremost, safety and well-being. So I talked to you about that already. Second, these are their words, not mine, equity and justice. They want to live in a world where the intersectional spectrum of identities that we represent are being affirmed rather than taking away rights from people. Those are their words. So they care passionately, and we saw this in the 2024 election cycle, passionately about gender equity, right? And all of the things we've been talking about here. They care passionately about economic mobility and seeing that they can achieve gender parity, that they can be paid for their work. They don't say they care about civic engagement, but what they do say, overwhelmingly, our members say that they do not believe that elected officials put trust in and execute the best interests of young people. So that they're not at the table, right? Because they're not old enough to be elected in many instances. And no one is sitting there saying, you know who we should be thinking about right now? Young people. So they care passionately about their elected officials doing something to help put the interests of young people at the table. And they care passionately about climate impact. The reason I do this work was grounded in that story I started off with, right? I was a young single mother, a teenager who was told I couldn't achieve. And I launched my first advocacy campaign to be able to have educational access. The reason I do this work every day is because I know that there's a young person somewhere who has been told they can't achieve or they won't achieve, and they need the opportunities that can be afforded to them to be able to achieve. What we hear young people that do something tell us all the time is that they want to do something, no pun intended. I could say do something all day, not because I get paid to, it's just like, it's a phrase you say all the time. But they often lack the skills, the tools, the resources to do something. And so when we talk to young people, they are passionate about addressing climate impacts. They're passionate about ensuring that their peers have access to culturally competent curriculum. Several years ago, we ran a campaign called Whole Histories, and it literally had young people giving advice to educators about how to have culturally competent curriculum in classrooms, that they wanted to see more representation of female identifying individuals in their curriculum. They wanted to see more information about people of color in their curriculum. And so that work still has to continue to make sure that if you can actually see yourself in the classroom, the place where they spend the majority of their time, let's be honest, we could all be great parents, but we're spending far fewer hours of the day with our children than the educators are. If it's not happening in the classroom, it is very hard to course correct that at home. Because at the dinner table, I'm like spoon feeding them all of the things they need to know. And I'm like, and here's Dr. Opoli, and here's that. They're like, calm down, we're just having dinner. I'm like, we're just having dinner, Mom. And so you actually have to ensure that that's happening in the classrooms. What I am hopeful about is that we see young women in particular, 60% of our membership, showing up day over day, taking action through our platform, but also craving opportunities to be in person to do something. And so that is hopeful because in this moment, all of us might want to like put our head under the covers or hide away, and we see young people showing up and raising their hands. So we are doing more of that work to bring young people together, to help them understand and be able to talk through difference, and then equip them to lead change. So we have a campaign called Show Up for What, where we're getting young people kind of that, the way you were talking to her uncle, that sense of self, like what matters to you, what motivates you to do what you do and what you care about. And then let's think about the us. Like what can you then do as an us? And now, how can we get that done? And when we bring young people together, especially young women, they get fired up, they're energized, and they're excited to continue on the path. Bless you.
Thank you. So we're almost at time, but I just wanted to end with asking you guys if you could reflect sort of on your own professional journeys. You know, what sort of lessons have you learned along the way that you feel like are valuable to share? And what advice would you give to young women out there who are thinking about their futures and how to successfully, you know, navigate all these gender gaps that seem to be there at sort of every corner? Well, what would you want to share with them?
You want me to go?
Sure.
The first thing I often say is find your common thread. And that common thread has been there from the moment you were born. Something that has always resonated with you, for you, and make sure that that shows up in everything that you do. Because then, even if you have a crappy job or a bad situation, you can come back to that and say, but is this what I care deeply about working on or learning or doing? And sometimes you are truly in the learning phase where you're just trying to learn how to do the financial management of something that will then allow you to do more of it. For me personally, it's always been women's empowerment since I was very, very little. And across my career, you'll see that in every step of that way, whether it was in management consulting, I was leading the Women in Business group, whether it was in entrepreneurship, for 10 years, I taught women how to grow their companies. I went to Sorensen to look at kind of the holistic way of addressing some of these policy issues to help women. And then I came here because I realized, oh, snap, that's going to take forever. I better get all the way down here and start thinking about what we're teaching these kids early on. And that's how I can continue to pull my personal thread to making sure that you know, women are empowered. So that's always my biggest piece of advice is look for your own common thread.
That's right. Oh, man, what do I say? What's the advice? You know, I think it kind of builds on what I was last talking about, starting with that sense of personal why, like what motivates you, like you said, the thread, or what motivates you to do good in the world. I want to continue to reinforce for all of us, but especially for young women, a quote from the Honorable Shirley Chisholm. So if I were at home and I was on Zoom, like in my background, Shirley Chisholm's in the background, just to remind people like where my values are. And Shirley Chisholm said, "You don't make progress whimpering and complaining in corners. You make progress by implementing good ideas." And so we don't lack for good ideas. In fact, women have a monopoly on good ideas, right? Like it's the problem is people are stealing our ideas and putting their name on it.
Right,
Like, I don't know, I'm just saying. Let's implement our good ideas, right? I want young women to see themselves in every single facet of our society. I want them to find their tribe. And their tribe doesn't just have to be the people who look like them, who have the same ideas, same values, same upbringing they have, right? I think the challenge of this moment, especially the digital lives that we lead, is that everybody gets to get in their little corners. And they're like, ooh, look at those people liking my things on the internet. We're all besties. We all got the same Kool-Aid on tap. You don't need only the same people in that silo with you. You need to diversify the perspective sitting at the table. You need to build your collective, your tribe of people to go implement those good ideas and stick at it. I think the thing that I feel most frustrated about as a leader, and again, I'm just like still on a high from last night, but you see someone like Dr. Opal Lee standing on the stage, 98-year-old woman, I was like, tears, I like literally had tears in my eyes. She didn't give up, right? Like, I think the challenge of this moment is we live in the instant gratification era. So like if I did something right now and it happened on the internet, I'm the best, I did that. So great, did you see how many likes I got? And then you move on, because it's fleeting. Then you pick something else that you move on to. And we forget to stick to it. Our leaders who came before us, who made change, who implemented good ideas, they were at it for generations. I'll say this last point and then I'll stop talking. I often say, do we know how long it took from the convention at Seneca Falls to the 19th Amendment?
Mm-hmm.
78 years.
78 years. Who has been doing something for 78 years, right? Like, so then we talk to young people, I'm like, no, not 78 seconds. I need you to do it maybe just for a year. Commit to the thing you care about for a year and stick at it. Because that perspective of like, you've got to stay the course and you got to train the next generation to stay the course and the next. The good news is in our digital era, we can accelerate movements. They don't have to take 78 years, thank goodness, but they ain't going to take 78 seconds to take to order your dinner. And so we have to make sure we're training young people and ourselves to have that muscle to stick at it.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been a really fascinating, really inspiring conversation. And thank you both for all of the wonderful work that you do. Marion's going to come and offer some closing remarks, but audience, I'm sure you have plenty of questions for our panelists, and just don't hesitate to come and find them and ask away. Thanks again.
Please.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, don't stop. I'm ready. Like, Devin, give my colleague Devin a hand. If you would be talking to let Alycen take your seat
Of
so they
course.
can have all three of these young ladies be able to greet them. I am a little bit excited, a little bit nervous.
What?
I'm excited because the three of you were downright amazing. And the information that you shared and the passion that you have to a room of passionate, powerful women was outstanding. And I thank you both all three of you from the bottom of my heart. I'm perplexed. This should have been a room filled with men and policymakers to be able to shift the needle. So to all 9 of us in the room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there you are, Tony. To all 6 of us in the room, let's make sure we get our dads, our uncles, our grandfathers, our brothers, our colleagues, because to shift America, to shift the world into a better place, I need all these young ladies and all these young ladies not only to be cheered, but encouraged, and for us to march with them every step of the way. This is not a woman's issue. This is not a Black issue. This is not a Latino issue. This is not an Asian issue. This is a people issue. And so to all of you, thank you very much. So again, thank you all for coming. Look for all of the other activities that we'll be hosting, but do me a favor, come greet them and tell them thank you. All of you have a great